Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us at this latest episode of our Keys webinar. We're really pleased to have you with us on such a key topic that affects all of us. We're going to talk today about people, planet, prosperity, how we can build an environment where we can live more sustainable lives in more sustainable businesses, and how we can build more sustainable societies. And to help us do that, we're delighted to have with us Usana, who's joining us from Bangkok, who's going to share with us the latest research and analysis on the landscape in Southeast Asia. We'll then move to Nashville, where Chris will rejoin the Keys stage and share with us his perspectives on how we can better understand and speak to customers, consumers, people, citizens, however we want to describe ourselves in our different contexts. And then we're going to move on and talk with Yumna, who joins us from Paris, about some of the opportunities that we can perhaps be taking advantage of when we're thinking about the sustainability agenda and the sustainability imperative. And in terms of the imperative, I wanted to start by thinking about the context in which we are all working. And I wanted to start by looking at the lens of public opinion. But the minute we do that, the minute we're reminded of how uncertain, how fluid, how depressing in some ways the current dynamic is. And I just wanted to spend a moment thinking about that to set the scene, because yes, it's absolutely true now, today, as we approach mid-2022, that the public around the world are worried about climate change. Our global trends study shows it to be the #1 value that unites us around the world, and 3 in 4 of us say that we've already noticed the effects of climate change as we go about our lives. But at the same time, it's also true that when we think about our daily lives, or what we've been worrying about in the last 2 or 3 weeks, we get a much broader picture. People have other priorities, other topics, other issues that they have to deal with. And when we think about what people have been worrying about in the last 2 or 3 weeks, we find that concern about climate change is number 8, and there are other topics and other concerns that take more priority. Chris will pick up on this concept of how the urgent is really sometimes taking precedent over the important topics. And just to illustrate that is the topic of inflation. 2, 3, 4 years ago, we weren't producing lots of reports and analysis on inflation here at Ipsos. Now we have to. It's now the #1 worry worldwide. 12 months ago, it was number 12. This month, we've seen it rise in prominence in almost every country we've been surveying. And that's just one of the many issues, of course, that people are having to deal with. Talking of issues that people have to deal with, let's think about the organizations that we work for and the changing context that they are operating in when they're thinking about topics around sustainability. And we thought this piece of work in the UK was quite illustrative about how the language is changing in businesses around the world. Look on the right-hand side. This is 2018. Sustainability and social responsibility, not particularly prominent when we were asking captains of industry to tell us what factors they take into account when making their judgments about different organizations. But gradually we're seeing that rise in prominence through time, so that last year we had much stronger sense about the importance of ethics and honesty, of sustainability, of social responsibility. And so the landscape and the language really moving. And one thing we're certainly seeing when we're thinking about the ESG agenda is a growing consensus, really, that these pillars of ESG, environmental, social, and governance, need to be looked at together rather than separately in silos. And it's one area where we're seeing parallels with public opinion, because the public themselves, I think it's fair to say, wouldn't claim to be experts on every aspect of the ESG agenda. It can get quite complicated, but we have done some polling just to take the mood and to see where their instincts are. And our corporate reputation research team asked them to prioritize them and tell us which one was number one. And what we found was that there's no single winner when it comes to number one. Public around the world actually see these topics of equal importance, and certainly when it comes to environment and society, those two are a little bit out in front. The other thing we thought we would mention in thinking about the context when we're thinking about organizations around the world is the sense of really now focusing on this as a priority. This is an example from the European business community. They're telling us that they have been spending more on ESG initiatives despite COVID, and that they're going to be spending more in the following period as well. And this is all around everybody, whether we're individuals, companies, governments, looking to take action to move us in a better and more sustainable direction. Here I'm drawing on our new report, which we prepared for Earth Day, where we've been surveying people in 31 countries around the world. And I wanted to share with you one particular question where we did look at this topic of how people might be taking action and what they're expecting. First thing to say is that they believe this to be a shared responsibility. Individuals, businesses, governments all need to take action if we're not going to be failing in our responsibilities. And if we go to ourselves as people, as citizens, we say that we know what to do on a personal level when it comes to fighting climate change. From the perspective of us as researchers or as analysts, we of course have the obligation to ask the question about whether we really do know in detail about what we need to do on a personal level. And this is where we get into the territory of the famous Theseidu gap, and Yumna will pick up on this a little bit later on. But just to illustrate where people's heads are at the moment, we believe as people around the world that switching to renewable energy is the main thing that's going to have a difference, that's going to make a difference when it comes to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The truth is that it's number 60. The truth is that living car free would make a far, far bigger difference. But if you look at our perceptions chart, living car free is tucked away at number 10 on our list. So that's a quick roundup of some aspects of the context in which we're all working. An uncertain dynamic, of course, when we're looking at people's lives, and we see that in the public opinion surveys. An increasing prominence in terms of priorities that organizations are placing on sustainability topics, and not just on the environment, sustainability in its broadest sense. And of course, a commitment from all of us to take action, even if we know that it's perhaps has in the past been imperfect and maybe not enough. Now, one of the things that's absolutely critical for us, if we're really to build a rounded sense of what's happening around the world, is to make sure that we look at things from different countries, from different societies, and in different contexts. And we're so pleased to have with us Usana, who's joining us from Bangkok, who's been taking a tour of the landscape in Southeast Asia, and to help us think through about the sustainability context from her perspective. Usana, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Simon. I'm very pleased to share with you guys today on what people in Southeast Asia have been thinking about environment, how much are they concerned about climate change, and what sustainability means to them. But before I go into that kind of detail, let's get to know about South Asia a bit. There are 11 countries in South Asia, and in terms of population-wise, it's almost around 700 million of population in South Asia, or is around 8.6% of world population. But what I would like to focus today is about 6 nations, which are Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. With all these 6 countries, there are around almost 590 million population, which is around 90% of South Asia population already. And with this kind of population, you can imagine the magnitude of how they do concern about the climate change. So when we look in terms of, the people in South Asia, there are around 90% of South Asia consumer agree that climate change is a serious threat to the economy and the quality of life. Why so? Look at Thailand in particular. There are 93%. This is like over or higher than the global average, which is already around 83, that concern about the climate change, because they believe that we are heading for the environmental disaster if we don't change our behavior now. But actually, I think we are already in the disaster situation already. Why I say so? Because climate change is already impacting our environment, impacting our country's productivity and well-being. Look at the scene here, the picture that this is something that happening now, is not like in the past, but it's happening now, because like any other Southeast Asia market except Singapore, our agriculture is a main or the major source of earning. And look at the climate change, what the impact that have on us is just about drought, flooding, sea level rising. And even, nowadays, recently, we have issue with the high quantity of PM2.5 particle, which have some impact on our human health, because there is a high incidence of people who get infected from the PM2.5, because they have some negative impact on respiratory disease and also cardiovascular effects that lead into the heart attack. We can see the number of people have impact on the negative health more and more nowadays. That's why this is very important, because when we look at the key causes of climate change, they are mainly due to the human activity. So considering the seriousness of the concern, do we need to do more? Of course, because around 80% of people saying that business is acting too slowly in terms of avoiding the harm of the global warming. So what we need to do is just we need to protecting the environment, not just say it, but we need to take some action. And then, because when we look at among the Thai population, 71% saying that if the business do not act now to fight with climate change, we will be very disappointing, because this is very important, because there's a clear expectation that business are investing in sustainability now, not anymore. So when I'm talking about the climate change impact, the crisis, the health issue, productivity, economy that happening in South Asia, so this is like a wake-up call for the sustainability agenda. Why I say so? Because also the young generation are willing to take part in the sustainability program, because they do care about the environment. This is not just with Thai generation. This is, for young generation, I believe it's across the globe as well. You will see a lot of young generation, young consumer marching on the street, call out for the environmental protection. And then there are some kind of, we can see on the commitment from the government and from the business sector in developing the sustainability approach for environmental, not just only from the international company, but the local giant company as well, because they are very committed to the roadmap to net zero. I just would like to give some example from the Thai company. This is a local giant company we call Thai Beverage, because their business have 4 business is they are spirit, beer, non-alcohol beverage, and food. They have been implementing the sustainability program for many years, but in terms of what I would like to share today is just 3 things apart from many things that they have been doing. The first one is about energy management. This is about clean air using solar cell instead of regular energy. And then the second one is around water management. there has been reduced water withdrawal from water-stressed area as well. And the third one is around sustainability packaging, because they are using the reused, recycled packaging for now. So I just would like to leave it with three things for South Asia about sustainability. Is first, about we have to have a clear sustainability program, and initiative in South Asia is a minimum requirement nowadays. And story doing is more important than storytelling. And you need to be very transparent in what are you going to do, because there are a lot of expectation from consumer in terms of, are you as a business going to fight for them for change to make environmental better? So this is something that I would like to leave it for today. We need to act it and try to make the crisis history. Thank you very much. Over to you, Simon.
Oh, well, thank you, Usana, for that panorama of the region, and I think really interesting what you're mentioning about the local giant companies and how they're really following through the agenda on a whole number of fronts. And I just sort of picks up on the kind of some of the broader questions that we're having in the webinar today. But you've been researching this topic for a number of years, and you've brought this together for us for our session now. What are the biggest changes that you would leave us with that you've seen in recent years in your part of the world?
Well, actually, what we have been seeing, in this part of the world is just, the global crisis in terms of the climate change has been severe, has been getting more and more concern around people here. And what I do see is young generation, well-educated people kind of marching on the street and try to request from the government or business sector to help in terms of battle to the situation here. But as we see that majority of people still have very low awareness of what company is doing. So this is something that I said here, doing rather than telling. And we need to have some kind of transparency in terms of, this is a plan that you want to do for the society, and this could be measurable and make some impact. That's kind of meets their expectation. Yeah.
Right. So really coming from the people and their expectations now, action is needed. So, well, yes. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for that, Usana. And that focus on the people and their expectations actually leads us very nicely on to our next presentation, because Chris, who joined us from Nashville, joined us back on the Keys stage. You've been doing some work, I know, to really look at how we can understand different groups of people within our societies, to think about where they are and to think about how we can maybe speak to them in the right way. So Chris, thank you for preparing this for us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Simon. So let's begin by acknowledging that while the environment is our most strategic long-term challenge, it can't help but be overshadowed by the urgent and immediate survival implications of being able to pay our bills, to stay healthy, to remain unharmed. So when we ask for top concerns in our 16-country essentials study, we actually get a different response by geography. So depending on where you live, the most pressing matter right now might be inflation, or the specter of war, or COVID. And of course, all of these issues are linked as we navigate, a truly multidimensional crisis. To punctuate a point that Simon made earlier, 2/3 of global citizens are worried about being able to pay their bills right now. Now, these quotes are from our longitudinal ethnography participants in the UK, the US, and China, and they're telling some pretty troubling stories of their day-to-day struggles. In the far right here, this young man from China is vividly expressing his concerns about inflation, lockdown, and even just his ability to earn money and survive given his circumstances. So for now, here's where the environment ranks on that list of top concerns by country. It just gives you a feel for the degree to which immediate matters are dominating in the moment. But still, as a constant undercurrent beneath our immediate worries, there is global agreement that the environment is a vital issue. As Simon noted, our global trend survey shows the vast majority believe we need to quickly act to change our habits and avoid long-term disaster. And if we shift to a commercial view of the same topic, this gives us a look at the results of some recent R&D on brand choice drivers. Now here, we're seeing evidence that environmental and other societal matters are starting to emerge as drivers of brand selection. In this particular illustration, you can see their relative predictive power. About 10 years ago, these items barely showed up in driver models, but now they're manifesting quite strongly across a number of categories. Now that said, more traditional measures, kind of portrayed there in the purple on the left, these functional emotional attributes, they are still heavy hitters, so not to be ignored, and we're going to come back to that in a moment. And of course, naturally, the relative importance of these drivers is going to vary by category, and it's going to vary by segment. So let's talk about segments. With that in mind, we have leveraged our Essentials data set to do a global sustainability segmentation. And we've classified people broadly on the two kind of data points or two broad constructs. One, how they feel, their level of concern about the environment, and then two, what they actually do to impact the environment. And what we see here is that citizens tend to fall into 5 groupings along a continuum of environmental activism. As you move across the continuum from left to right, the sense of urgency of the matter increases. And if we take a closer look at each of these segments and how they feel about the environment, let's start with our 19% that we have classified as disengaged denialists. For them, the environment is either not a concern or they've got a bit of a fatalistic outlook that the collapse is inevitable. So they're a bit less inclined to see any type of corrective action as being worthwhile. Now, plenty of our second group, the skeptics, will acknowledge the issue, but a lot of them will say, yeah, it's a bit overblown. And they will also completely withdraw when it comes to taking any type of personal action to address climate change. So they kind of see it as inconvenient and a non-priority. Our conflicted contributors, they express real concern, but their financial situation totally takes priority. There's very little willingness to pay any type of premium for a sustainability benefit here. So basically, we're losing skeptics at the verb do, and we're losing the conflicted at the verb pay. As we move along the continuum and get to our pragmatists, they're a bit older, a bit richer, and very well-meaning. They express very urgent concerns about the environment, but the actions they're taking are a little bit more low impact. We'll talk about that in a second. But the great news is they are mentally and fiscally prepared to take action. On the far right of our continuum, we have our activists. They do skew a bit younger and heavily female. They're making tangible, high-impact lifestyle compromises and even paying premiums for environmentally friendly brands. So that's how they feel. What about what they do? So on this page, I'm going to be referencing high-impact actions, and that's just a reference to activities proven to reduce greenhouse emissions the most. And on one end of that do spectrum, we have our denialists. And as you might suspect, their fatalism is translating to inaction. So are they into recycling? Are they into low energy light bulbs? Are they willing to forego driving? Are they eating plant-based diet? Well, to channel Roy Kent from Ted Lasso, no. If we move on to another group, you might have heard the saying, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. Our pragmatists, as noted before, they mean very well, but they're taking action through very low impact activities like using low energy light bulbs, recycling. But properly educated, it does seem like their passion for the environment could be more efficiently directed to higher impact actions. And then lastly, we've got our high impact activists. Again, these folks, younger, female, really most likely to engage in truly high impact activities like foregoing car ownership, avoiding long flights, and going with a mostly plant-based diet. So, what are the implications of all this for commercial brands? Earlier we showed that socio-environmental factors are indeed emerging as drivers of brand choice along with functional benefits. Now this quote here from our colleague Pippa, I think is quite powerful. And what she's really saying is that if we want to entice consumers to action, we've got to be able to punch the functional benefits that are important to them rather than just leading with sustainability as a primary benefit. Which is to say, a brand leader needs to think about the product and the job it needs to do, then think about how to accomplish that in a more sustainable way. A really cool example of this comes from the UK. So NOAA, short for Nothing Wasted, has recently launched a tablet form toothpaste in the UK a couple of years ago. And their marketing is very cleverly captured by the phrase, a winning smile doesn't mean the planet has to lose. Now, the product itself provides a very clear environmental benefit, but it stresses practical benefits of superior efficacy, reduced mess, ease of use, affordability, or in our segment's language, for the skeptic who cannot be inconvenienced, they have something, and for the conflicted who won't pay extra, they have something. So if we recap this a bit, look, it can be very hard to focus on this stuff when 2/3 of the world is worried about paying their bills. And yet we do see global alignment on this issue, and we do see the emergence of environmental drivers as drivers of brand preference. We've introduced you to some new groups today, and I think how we approach them commercially will vary. If you're dealing with a skeptic, remember, they don't want to expend much effort. So frictionless convenience is going to be key. If you're dealing with a conflicted contributor, remember, price prevails. So sustainability benefits are going to lose all relevance if they're linked to a higher price. The pragmatist, very intriguing because of this passion for the environment, and they're not deterred by cost. So with some education, those good intentions could very well translate to real impact. And then lastly, our activists, they are walking the talk in a high impact way. And they are a key audience for premium sustainable products. I think for brand leaders, the message here that we want to send is that sustainability is best positioned as a co-benefit, not the benefit. And let's be really conscious of these segments as we think about what points to stress to whom. Now in a moment, Yumna is going to expand on some of these points about the commercial opportunity, but for now, back to Simon in the studio.
Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you for giving us that framework of how we perhaps need to really get our heads around some of the different groups we need to understand. And I think the segmentation is super interesting. Do you expect these segments to change over time as we look ahead? What's your sense of how fluid or not they are?
Yeah, great question. So I think we got to remember, Simon, that this segmentation represents the here and now. It's a product of a very unique time and a unique context. So I think given the link between sustainability and all those other multidimensional crisis elements that we talked about before, I think it is likely that the attitudes, the behaviors, they're going to evolve, right? So it's our job to measure that evolution over time.
Well, it's also my job, I think, to ask some questions. And so I've got one more question for you, Chris. We couldn't leave you without asking you where you are on that segmentation spectrum. Are you disengaged, skeptic, pragmatist? Tell us a bit about where you think you sit.
Well, first, thank you for making this a matter of public record, Simon. So, the truth is I'm probably one of those pragmatists with misaligned intentions and priorities. But I have recently gone to a plant-based diet. Feels good. Yeah.
There you are. Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you for sharing that with us. That's fantastic analysis. And as you say, it leads us really well into our final presentation, because of course one of the big questions now is where are the opportunities and how can businesses and organizations work really well to to take advantage of them and help us build a more sustainable environment in its broader sense. Yumna, you've been thinking about this in some detail, and we're so pleased that you're with us today to share with us your thoughts on the sustainability opportunity.
Thank you, Simon. And I will immediately build on some of the things Chris just presented to develop on how companies can leverage sustainability as a business opportunity indeed. So based on our experience and the conversations we're having with clients, we think that this value may come or will come partly from better focusing on the consumer perspective as opposed to the citizen perspective, and keeping in mind, of course, that we're all both. Because Simon, you yourself mentioned earlier the Theseidu gap, showing that some people don't do what they say. And our hypothesis is that this Theseidu gap is partly because people are, or because companies are speaking to people as citizens, and most of their actions are addressing citizen issues more often than consumer issues. And what Chris showed earlier is, well, we're very happy that there are so many activists, but most consumers are not activists. And so they will need a little help if you do want them to consume more sustainably. And so how can businesses create consumer value with sustainability? We found very interesting sources of inspiration in the digital transformation case, because digital has transformed the way companies have been doing business and creating consumer value over the past 20 years. And this is still going on. And even more interestingly, we're seeing with some of our clients that digital and sustainability are getting intertwined. So we think is maybe what we learned along the way can inspire how to approach sustainability. And we have identified 6 areas of lessons or drivers for change that we can take inspiration from. So of course, I'm not going to comment on all of these here today. I'm going to illustrate just 3 of them. But if you're interested, the full presentation is available, of course. So let's start with the first one, which is about the offer. And we think that it's all about the offer. It's not about the demand. So there's a need for business proactivity here. What happened in digital, but in other areas as well, is consumers did not expect the internet, mobile phones, YouTube, TikTok, Alibaba. They never expected cars either. So there's so much you can ask consumers for. And that's the good news, because it means there's room for innovation here. Companies need to be proactive and start first, and don't wait for consumer expectations. They can only give you feedback on what they're experiencing. One great example we found in the sustainability area is Beyond Meat. But Beyond Meat, it's the whole plant-based industry that is interesting. So here, in this case, when you put together the fact that we need maybe less carbon emissions, there are so many billion people we need to feed, the need to improve animal welfare, and so on. Some people thought that maybe one solution to that would be to have something that looks like meat, smells like meat, tastes like meat, but is not meat, because people love meat as well. And so they came up with plant-based burgers, sausages, meatballs. It doesn't mean it's the only solution. It means it's one solution. But this is an area where you see how imagination and innovation can bring value, addressing trends, but things consumers are not expecting at all. Another area that is interesting is creating valuable use cases. And Chris mentioned it earlier a little bit as well. Gadget offerings do not work. Real value doesn't come on top. It's not the green cherry on top of your existing products. It must be embedded by design for consumers to buy and use the product or the service repeatedly. This is something we saw very interestingly with the mobile. Mobile data and internet traffic didn't take off until the iPhone was launched in 2007. And yet, you could access internet with your mobile phone from very early on. I remember at that time, I used to work in a digital agency. And every year we would say, well, it's going to be the mobile year, and nothing was happening. And that the iPhone was launched. And that revolutionized the whole industry. But why? Because it was designed to use the internet as a service and not as a product. And so this is key. And this is very interesting as well, because it may mean on sustainability that we can stop looking at it only as the end goal, but consider it as a means to better address consumer needs. And one interesting example we picked here in the product areas in the apparel industry is Tommy Hilfiger. And so they created a line called Tommy Adapted. So most companies, the way they will address inclusivity is through HR or maybe by supporting or funding associations. What they did is they launched a line of products designed by disabled people for disabled people. So the products are inclusive by design, and you can see some of the examples on the screen. That makes the whole difference in terms of value. What is interesting is that proved beneficial for the whole business, because as they said, 80% of their customers who purchased from their adaptive line were new, but that led to additional purchase overall, because just because they bought an adaptive shirt didn't mean they needed adaptive pants. Third and last example in area, and this may seem obvious, but it's not that easy, is engaging employees and business partners. Business transformation cannot happen alone. And here I'm going to pick some examples from France, since I'm speaking in France, but I think you have similar examples in your country. So for example, all the businesses that were based on paper catalog, they had to encounter huge transformation to turn their business into profitable online e-commerce business. And that involved engaging the employees, changing ways of working, involving supply chain, logistics, etc. And that doesn't work if you don't consider your employees and your partners together in terms of ecosystem, because otherwise there's so much external consultants or experts can do to help you move fast. So the key point here is to think ecosystem. It doesn't work alone. You need to involve your internal and external partners in your sustainability roadmap. And the great example we're seeing here is Backmarket. Backmarket is an online marketplace specialized in repackaged electronic goods. So basically, the consumer value is that you can buy through them cheaper iPhones. They're selling repackaged smartphones and high tech. But they managed to do so because they've developed in a very selective reseller program, certifying their resellers on their environmental, social practices, using an independent certifying organism. And this is how they're driving more premium brands to work with them, and therefore increasing their consumer value. So in short, 3 learnings we can build on. Sustainability is a real opportunity for businesses to create value, but you need to think consumer-centric innovation first. Second point is sustainability should be embedded by design if you really wanted to create different products and services. Think of it as a means and not only as an end goal. And finally, there's inspiration out there. And most companies have gone now through digital transformation. So what you have learned and what you're still learning can tell us all together a few lessons that we can build on to inspire unique sustainability approaches. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Yumna. And that helicopter view actually of the digital transformation, because we've all lived through it. I've never really quite, your point about how the year of the mobile never came until it did, I think is quite instructive for us thinking about it, 15 years after the iPhone. And I suppose one of the big takeaways I took from your advice and your talk was, I think on this topic, you can get a bit depressed and thinking about this as a problem and it's all terrible. And clearly there are huge issues that we've been talking about in the webinar. But I think what my takeaway from you is perhaps also we really can and must think about the possibilities and the potential if we're going to make some really good actions in the future.
Definitely. I really think, there's so many constraints over there and there's so many guilt, feeling, you made Chris feel guilty earlier on in this webinar. I think, but it can't be the way. I think there's a great opportunity here for innovation, and maybe some word that we rarely use in the business field is imagination. So, and I think there's really, that's the only way forward. And we've seen in other areas how we can create and invent so many things. So there's really opportunity for businesses to do this, and consumers will follow. Why not?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think, well, that's a great. Well, I think we must leave on an optimistic note, and I think your point, about imagination and also picking up on where Usana was, the consumers are ready, but actually this, but we need to really push ourselves to make sure that we we move forward and take advantage of the opportunities. So, well, thank you again to all of our speakers for bringing together these perspectives. I mean, we all know this is such a complex topic and we can only ever scratch the surface, but I hope these contributions have been useful to everybody on the call today. We're so pleased you were able to join us. We'll make the material available to you all after the session, and I hope we can see you again at the next Keys webinar very soon. So thank you very much for joining us and have a great rest of day. Bye-bye.